Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Paul, for that very generous introduction. Well, it has been a long road to this film. As you'll learn in the film tonight, I first got the idea for the book Live Not by Lies back in 2015 when I got a call from a doctor in the American Midwest who said that his elderly mother, who had spent 6 years as a political prisoner in her home country of Czechoslovakia in the 1950s, but she got out after prison, she came to America, but she said, "Son, the things I see happening in America today remind me of what it was like when the communists first came to power in my country." Now, I thought that was a little extreme, maybe. Where are the gulags? Where are the secret police? But whenever I would travel around the US to conferences or whatever, if I would meet someone who had come to America to escape communism from the Soviet bloc, I would ask them, are the things you're seeing in what we now call the Great Awakening, does it remind you of what you left behind? They all said yes. And I figured we have to listen to them. So I ended up writing a book called Live Not by Lies. The line comes from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's final communique to his followers in the Soviet Union before they exiled him. And in the first part of the book, I explained what precisely these people were seeing in America that reminded them of totalitarianism, but also I described why it's somewhat different. I mean, we're not living in George Orwell's version of totalitarianism. Ours is a lot more like Aldous Huxley, as you'll see in the film. The second half of the book involved me going to the former countries of the Soviet bloc, interviewing Christians who had not left, but who had stayed behind and resisted, many of them going to prison. You'll see some of them and hear their stories in the film tonight. But I asked them all, what advice would you give to us in the West about how to resist this stuff? And it all ultimately comes down to being willing to suffer as Christ suffered. That's the bottom line. If we're not willing to suffer, as a Russian Baptist pastor told me, standing off a red square, he said, if you're not willing to suffer, your faith is meaningless. Now, that's a bracing thing for an American Christian to hear, but as you'll see tonight, it's really true. Finally, so many of us think about fighting wokeness and what I call soft totalitarianism only because it doesn't require the police state to achieve its aims. So many of us see politics and law as the way to fight it. And yes, we have to use politics and law to fight it, but that's not the most important thing. What you'll see tonight in this film, especially listening to the testimonies of these saints who resisted, is that faith is ultimately the solution, the only solution. I live in Hungary now, in Budapest, the capital, and Viktor Orban is a Reformed Christian who is the prime minister of our country. And he said something really important once. I've never forgotten this. He said, people look to me as a politician for meaning. And that's wrong. He said, I can't give you meaning. I'm a politician. I can give you things. But if the institutions that provide us meaning, most especially the churches, but also families, schools, arts organizations, and so forth, if they don't step into the open space provided by politics and do what they're supposed to do, lead people to the truth and to meaning and purpose and to the Lord, then anything politics accomplishes will be temporary. So I want you to think of that tonight when you're watching the film. Because, in Europe where I live, I cannot tell you enough about how important it is to have ADF International in Europe. As difficult as things can be here in the United States with religious liberty, magnify that times 10 in Europe, and you'll see how incredibly important the courage and the expertise and the witness of ADF International is. But keep in mind as you watch this tonight, there's a reason the film, I didn't make the film, I just wrote the book on which the film is based. But there's a reason this film leans more into story and stories about faith than about pure politics. And that's because faith in the truth, and faith in the truth that is Jesus Christ, that is the only way we will be saved, and that is the only way we'll save our liberty. So without further ado, I thank you for coming tonight, and I present to you Live Not by Lies.
See all the rest of the series. But Rod, let's go ahead and just jump in right now. I mean, you wrote this book, and you told us why you wrote the book. But now we have the film. And the film comes at an interesting time, because we had, in between the time that the book was written and today, we had this election that happened in the United States in 2024. You've noticed. Even watching from Hungary. And the question I think that is on people's minds is, how is this still relevant today? We talked this morning with Aaron Wrenn, who wrote the book famously, The Negative World. And he said, maybe I'm having to revise my thesis a little bit, but we're still not in a Christian world or a positive world. We're entering into something different. And my question to you is, how is this still relevant today for the United States? And also talk a little bit about why this is very relevant for the continent of Europe.
Well, I should start by saying that I thought you were going to be seeing the feature-length version of this, an episode 4 of the 4-part series you can see on angel.com. That's the most moving part. That has the testimonies on it. So if this whetted your appetite, please go to angel.com, sign up, become a guild member, and watch episode 4. It is extraordinary. Now, to answer your question, I got the same question in Nashville when we did a screening there. They said, well, Trump is in power. Hasn't the danger passed? Absolutely not. I'm glad Trump is in power. I'm glad he is pushing back on some of the worst parts of soft totalitarianism. But we can't forget that the things that Hannah Arendt said were necessary for totalitarianism, mass loneliness, loss of faith in hierarchies and authority, a love of transgression for its own sake, and other things, they're still very, very much with us. And I have been shocked and dismayed in recent months to discover how on my own side, on the political right, we're seeing a rise of anti-Semitism. We're seeing a rise of things arise that deeply, deeply concern me as a believer in Christ. So the problem is not, the crisis is not over. We have breathing space now, but people absolutely should not think that, okay, let's move on to the next thing, because until and unless we get the core sources of the draw to totalitarianism dealt with, we're always going to be in trouble. And I don't want to live in a right-wing totalitarian or soft totalitarian society any more than I want to live in a left-wing version.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeff, I want to bring you in. Jeff, you're the co-founder and chief content officer at Angel Studios. And tell us a little bit about why Angel decided to take this project on, and what has the reception to the project been, both here in the United States and abroad? And tell us a little bit more about the arch of the series. This is part 1. We have 4 parts. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, to start on the 4 parts, I just sent you, Ryan, I sent you 3 links, 1 to each episode. And Ryan can send them out to all of you. And if you click on one of those links, you'll be able to watch the next episodes for free. You can download the Angel app on your TV and just use that link. It'll give you access to them, and you can see the rest of the series. Yeah. And then if you want, you can join the Angel Guild. And the reason why we took on this series is because Rod's team came to us and said, we would like to make this series, and they brought us a short film version of the series, and they said they put it in front of what we call the Angel Guild. It's a group of 1.4 million people worldwide, from over 170 countries that vote on everything that comes into Angel Studios. So in the Hollywood system, there is a gatekeeper group that's only a dozen people, maybe between 1 and 2 dozen people, who make 95% of all the decisions about which films go to theaters and which films go to streaming. And these are gatekeepers. And so it's not the actual craftsmen that are the problem in Hollywood, it's the gatekeepers. And so our Angel Studios, we're replacing that gatekeeper system with the Angel Guild, which is any person anywhere in the world can sign up, and you're contributing $20 a month to be able to decide which movies and TV series come into Angel Studios. So the Angel Guild voted on this series, and they want this to exist. This series would never have been produced or distributed by Netflix or by Amazon or any other major studio. They just wouldn't have taken it because those gatekeepers would have said, this is not our thing. But the Angel Guild said, this is our thing. And so that's the reason why we brought it on. And the response to this has been, well, one, I remember right when Trump won the election, I was like, well, this is probably not as good for Live Not by Lies. If Trump, I was talking to Glenn Beck, and he said, I want Trump to win, even though I think it's going to cost me a fortune, because if Kamala wins, I would make way more money. And I was like, well, that probably applies to this series. What's been shocking, and there is just a little bit of maybe it's like a marathon that just got run and all the conservatives are just fell over the finish line to get Trump elected, and they're just exhausted, and they're maybe it's not apathy, but the response globally has been, we need this film in our countries. We don't have, Eastern Europe doesn't have the same momentum and wind at their back as the United States does at the moment. And so I was just talking to Rod backstage, and we're building a way for this to be translated into more languages. And if those who are here, if there's somebody here who has a language specifically that you need this to be translated into, come talk to me afterwards, especially if you can help, because we'll probably go after the very top languages, but you're welcome to help as well with that.
I'm so glad to hear that, because living in Europe as I do, I've been living in Hungary for 4 years, it has really opened my eyes to how different things are than they are in America. I mean, yeah, it's obvious to say that, but the Christians over there, and not just Christians, but conservatives who love free speech and who want the old classical liberal values, they are so besieged. They are overwhelmed by a media that is entirely liberal, and most of them don't have any alternative like we do in the United States. And so when they get books like Live Not by Lies, when they see things like this, they are so encouraged. I was in France in March. My newest book was translated into French. And I was traveling around doing a book tour. And people had heard that there's a Live Not by Lies film. They were saying, can you translate it into French? We desperately need it here. The people need somebody to recognize and see in film and recognize what they're going through too, and what they see as well, and to let them know it doesn't have to be that way. And you know, the strangest and saddest thing for me as an American and as an American patriot is to travel throughout Eastern Europe, the former Eastern Europe, and to give speeches. In the Q&A, there's always someone, usually an older person, who will raise his hand very tentatively and say, almost apologetically, sir, during the Cold War, we all looked to America for hope as an example for us. And now we all look to America and we're afraid of it. What happened? Well, I mean, I have an answer for them, but it's a shameful thing as an American to have to live with that. But we don't have to be defeated. And Ironically enough, the experience of the Christians and other dissidents who stood up to the lies of Soviet communism actually have lessons to teach us for how to stand up to the much more subtle lies, but no less totalitarian lies that we're having to live with now, such as men can be women, but there's so many more.
And so I want to pick up on that theme. And by the way, we will put those links to the additional episodes in the app, so you'll be able to access those and use those to access the additional episodes. So thank you for that, Jeff. And also, please be thinking of questions as you listen to the panel, because we're going to reserve a little bit of time at the end for some interaction with the panelists. So if you have questions for our panelists, please be thinking of those now. We're going to save a little bit of time at the end for that. But Rod, I want to talk about this concept that was in the film, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, which is the distinction between hard totalitarianism and soft totalitarianism. Because something you said earlier, there are no gulags in the United States. We don't see secret police or Stasi running around. Even going to Western Europe, as people visit France and the UK, where you and I were just recently there for the ARC conference, you look at that society and you think, well, this is a free Western society. And yet, we have this problem of soft totalitarianism that arises right under our noses. Unpack that a little bit for us. What are the hallmarks of soft totalitarianism, and how do we see it? How do we know it when we see it here in the West?
Right, well, as you saw in the film with what happened to Isabel von Spruce and what has happened more recently to Billboard Chris and ADF's Lois McClatchy Miller in Brussels, the soft totalitarianism of Europe is getting ever harder. Nevertheless, I call it soft totalitarianism to distinguish it from the George Orwell version, which requires gulags, prisons, secret police, and the imposition of force to compel people to conform. Well, we don't have that, but people still conform. I mean, COVID has been the great example in our lifetime. In fact, I think the reason that this book, Live Not by Lies, sold so many copies in the U.S., it sold over 200,000 copies on word of mouth almost exclusively because it got no media coverage. The fact is that social conformity can be huge. Mm-hmm. The whole question of DEI after the summer of George Floyd, that was the same thing. You didn't dare stand up and say, wait a minute, this is racist. I'm all for justice, but you can't say that all white people are evil. And so this is what Solzhenitsyn warned about. Solzhenitsyn famously said in the Gulag Archipelago that the thing he learned in the Gulag was that the line between good and evil does not run down the middle of between social classes, between races, between religions. It runs right down the middle of every human heart. That is so deeply Christian. But you couldn't say that in the fall of 2020. And that's why I think so many people bought the book. Well, I'll give you an example of soft totalitarianism by telling you a story that appears in the book Live Not by Lies, and it has stayed with me over the years. In 2019, when I was in Budapest, going from interview to interview, talking to people who had been to prison under Hungarian communism, my interpreter was a young, faithfully Catholic woman, Anna. She had a small child at home, and she said, Rod, you know, I really struggle. When I try to talk to even my Christian friends about my struggles, they don't understand. I said, what's going on? She said, well, if I tell them that my husband and I have been arguing a lot lately, or my little boy he's struggled to sleep and he's really causing trouble in our home, they cut me off and say, oh, you've got to get a divorce, put your child in daycare, go back to work, you deserve to be happy. And she said, I can't make them understand that I'm happily married. I love being a mom. But being a happy mom and a happy wife does not mean a life without friction, without struggle. And they have no idea what I'm talking about. And I looked at her and said, Anna, it sounds like you're fighting for your right to be unhappy. She said, that's it. Where did you get that? Chapter 17 of Huxley's Brave New World. And in that chapter, you know, unlike in Orwell's 1984, when Winston Smith is brought before O'Brien, the torturer who tortures him to affirm the goodness of Big Brother. In Brave New World, people are offered so many things that make them happy. They're offered soma, the drug, they're taken care of, they're entertained, they have all the sex they want, and so on and so forth. People want to surrender their humanity to be part of this, to have everything taken care of, to be constantly entertained and given pleasure. John the Savage, in that chapter 17, he was raised outside of this dystopia. He refuses all this because he wants to be fully human, and that requires the willingness to suffer. And finally, the world controller for Europe says, it sounds like you're fighting for your right to be unhappy. And he says, okay, I am fighting for my right to be unhappy, and I'm fighting for my right to God and to music and to art and to sin and to all the things that make us human. And the world controller says, you're welcome to it, go away. Well, this is the core of soft totalitarianism, a totalitarianism that gets us to surrender our liberties and the truth for the sake of keeping everything fine, of being happy, of being respected in society, of maintaining our position. But slowly and slowly, liberty erodes. I remember thinking back when Obergefell came out, I said, okay, we've lost this, but when the trans people start coming after kids, that's when American Christians will stand up. Didn't happen. It really didn't happen. And I think that is a sign of soft totalitarianism. Christians being too afraid to take a stand and be called out as bad people. There's a great film made by Terrence Malick called To the Wonder. Very underrated. It came out in 2013. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about his book, his movie about A Hidden Life. That's the one. Yeah, I love To the Wonder, too. A Hidden Life is based on the true story of Franz Jägerstätter, an Austrian farmer, a Catholic, who was ultimately martyred by Hitler because he wouldn't swear allegiance to Hitler. Now, there's a scene in that film that is so crucial. Franz is walking into his village church during the Nazi period, and he sees an artist painting pictures of biblical scenes on the wall. And the old artist tells him, he said, you know, people come here to see these pictures of Jesus and the biblical characters, and they admire them. The problem is, Jesus didn't call admirers. Jesus called disciples. And, said the artist, you can tell the difference between an admirer and a disciple by their willingness to suffer. And that is the key to living not by lies. That is why Solzhenitsyn got thrown out of Russia. You know, you don't have to go stand out in the middle of the square with a bullhorn and denounce all the lies around you. But if you're not willing in your daily life to refuse these things, if you just want to conform, to go along, to get along so everyone will think well of you, then as the old Russian pastor I mentioned earlier said, your faith is worthless. I got to tell you, Ryan, I learned something back in France in 2018 when I went to Paris to promote the French version of my earlier book, The Benedict Option, which calls for Christians to live in a more intentional way and countercultural way in the face of the post-Christian society. I noticed everyone I talked to was Christian, but those who were my age, I was like 51 then, my age and older, they really had a problem with the book and its thesis. Those Christians who were younger, no problem at all. They just wanted to know, how can we be more faithful? And I finally figured out what the deal was. Those who were my age and older were still, they were well established in their careers and in society, and they were desperate to believe that somehow they could reconcile everything they believed with being a good, paid-up, well-accepted member of society. And the fact that I was saying, you really can't anymore, I didn't use the word, but it's negative world, that bothered them. The younger Christians who had not achieved that level of middle-class success, and they didn't care. They just loved Jesus. And they're like, how can we be for Jesus? And I think that we have so much to learn from the young in that way, because they are the ones who are going to show the way, because they want Christ more than they want bourgeois respectability.
And so I want to, last question, and then we're going to go to audience questions. And this is building on what you both just said, intentional community, face-to-face communication. No conversation today is complete without raising the specter of AI. And you've been talking about this, this concept of negative world, the necessity of speaking truth. How is the rise of artificial intelligence going to complicate or change the conversation around the necessity of or enhance the conversation around the necessity of speaking the truth in this cultural moment?
We won't even know what truth is anymore. Truth is whatever appears in front of us and sounds most plausible. It's really terrifying. I wrote my most recent book. It's called Living in Wonder, about Christian re-enchantment, and I talk in the book about the prospect of AI being a false god, where people will turn to it as if it were real and look to it for wisdom and direction. That's already happening. New York Times wrote a story about it. And so it becomes ever more important for reasons that are not particularly political, but technological, to know what truth is and know that our truth is, what is true is the God-man Jesus Christ and Holy Scripture, which testifies to him. And if we don't ground ourselves and our children firmly in that, we're going to be swept away by this, by AI. And it is absolutely terrifying. It is the most important, and I think will be the most potent tool for totalitarianism that we've ever seen.
I think AI has two sides to it. That there's one that's terrifying, which I agree with. That for many, many years, I remember my wife's from Brazil, and in Brazil, she remembers growing up in hyperinflation, and she remembers people getting carted away during a period of totalitarianism. And when I was there, I remember thinking, but it feels very free here, because people are in these, there's a market in Sao Paulo that has like 3 million people in it, and it's called 25 de Março, and you just go and you buy meat and you buy everything, and there's no taxes, and it's all cheap, and it's like this Wild West market. And there's not really regulation in that market. But then I realized, they have hundreds of or thousands of pages of regulation that they can use to pinpoint and go after individuals that they want, the people that they don't like, that cross the politicians. All these laws get used against them, even though the average person isn't obeying almost any laws. They're selling on the street. They don't have any regulations, no licenses. But the political enemies get targeted. My fear with AI, this is on the dark side, is that since the Patriot Act, and even before that probably, we've been collecting as a government, I shouldn't say we, the government has been collecting vast troves of data. And none of it was usable. It's just these huge servers of data. And it was usable if you were a political enemy, the way you see them attack Trump over the last 4 years, and other people have been attacked. As long as there's enough resources to go after one person, they can make you a political enemy, and it's starting to look more and more like Brazil that way, or other countries. But as AI comes into place, I am able to take a legal opinion and throw it into AI and ask a couple of questions and go and churn through that opinion and get answers that are so applicable and so detailed, and that would take me thousands of dollars of attorney fees to get the same answer. And I can get it in seconds. Now imagine all of the data that's been collected on you for the last 20 years since 9/11. And now you have AI able to target people in mass and being able to go after people in mass. And that's what's scary to me, is that it actually makes that data usable rather than just being able to, as long as you're not a powerful political enemy, they don't go after you. But now they can go after many political enemies. So that's the first thing. On the good side, it's flattening the world. Like in the art world, film is going to go down to probably 1/10 the cost to produce. And AI is derivative filmmakers who are worried about AI taking their job need to understand there is a human element. Every great piece of art you've ever seen, every great book, every timeless piece of art has a story of tremendous pain and suffering behind that artist. The stuff that makes us be able to write things that transcend time and space involves pain and suffering. Adam and Eve, when they take of the fruit, God says they can now feel pain and suffering. And there's something about that makes us human. And so unless AI can feel pain and suffering, it will always be a derivative of those who have suffered pain, which means that the people who make derivative art, their jobs are going to disappear. But those who make original art that can withstand time, they're going to become more powerful artists. So on that front, I'm actually not worried. I think it flattens the world. We're going to see 10 times as many great movies. We're going to see art come down in cost, and it'll be kind of a golden era of art. But there are there's these two sides. And I think what Rod is saying about pain and suffering and embracing it and saying what you want is the freedom to have pain and suffering, that is the source of true timeless art that lasts generations.
The truth of it comes with inconvenience. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I use Grok, the AI on Twitter, as my Google search now, you know. And but the thing that I have to always keep in mind is the point Jordan was making about what's been called surveillance capitalism. Almost everything we do produces data. Every shopping thing we do, everything we watch, it produces data that's stored somewhere. When people use Alexa in your home, most Americans have an Alexa in their home. That Alexa listens to you, and it also knows whatever you've bought, whatever you've chosen to listen to, etc. That data goes somewhere. And AI gives, wherever the data is stored, it gives the power to sort through it very quickly. And if the people in power choose to target you because of the books you've bought, the music you've listened to, etc., they have that information there. Now, there's no way to fully, unless you're going to go off the grid and go live in Montana somewhere, there's no way to be completely outside of this system. But even when we do things like we all do, like I do, buy things with the debit card, there is an electronic recording of that transaction. There's a record of it, and it's stored somewhere. Think about that, and think about what a totalitarian government like Communist China today or the Soviet Union could have done with it. We are making ourselves vulnerable to totalitarianism for the sake of comfort, and I'm as guilty as anybody else.